Looks like that's going to be working for us. So with any luck, hello and welcome to those who are joining us on YouTube.
Yep.
We are a minute late getting on here because YouTube and Zoom were not playing nicely together, but it looks like it's working now. Um, so,
Yep, son.
so welcome. Glad to have you with us as we're back for another week of our Bible study. We are.
I guess they do.
Let me try this and see if that makes it look better. Okay. Trying to get the video looking right on Zoom. All right, I think we're up and running. We're going to go with it and hope this works. So welcome to those that are joining us on the live stream. As always, please feel free to join us in the chat and say hello and join in the conversation that way. We're glad to have you with us. Today is our second week in the book of Ruth. For all those who were able to be with us last week, we got started a little bit reading the first chapter of Ruth, and it's a wonderful story, one that we have probably heard many times in our lives. And it's only 4 chapters; it's not too long, and it's just there's a lot there. It's a lovely story on its surface, and also as we kind of go deeper in different ways, there's a lot of lessons to take away from it, and a lot to see about the world and human nature as well. And so why don't we just go ahead and move toward that. Sorry, trying to pull this up here. Today we're going to, as we look at Ruth and Naomi and their relationships together, we get into, perhaps a good place to start would be this idea of loyalty. We see Ruth's loyalty to Naomi. So maybe before we even read, how do you define loyalty? And what makes loyalty a challenge for us? There's no one right answer. So who would like to speak to that? How do you define loyalty? Perhaps we think of pets, dogs that are loyal, people that are loyal. What is it that makes someone loyal, and why is that hard? Is maybe an even more interesting question.
I think of full and open honesty as a very big factor in loyalty to another person.
I like that. That takes loyalty to a deeper level, doesn't it? So not just sticking around, but being open and honest fully.
Loyalty does mean different things to different people. I grew up with a father who thought loyalty lasted no matter what, that you were always loyal. But that meant agreeing or not criticizing. And I don't follow it that way. I follow loyalty as something like I was to my children, but correcting them when they needed it or teaching them. Didn't mean I wouldn't have defended them against the world, but it's like, I'll vote for this person, my dad said, no matter if he's a crook. Well, that's loyalty to my dad. Turned out he was,
Yeah.
right. But anyway.
Yeah, so loyalty doesn't mean being uncritical. I appreciate that loyalty can involve the honesty that Val mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, well, let's keep this question of loyalty in our head as we read the story, because as you remember from last week, of course, we have Naomi, who has her husband and 2 sons. The sons got married, and then both the husband and the 2 sons die, and she's left with her 2 daughters-in-law from Moab, these Moabite women. And she's at this crossroads trying to figure out what to do. And so she had decided she's going to go back home. She's going to leave Moab, travel back home to Bethlehem, where she is from. And she's urging her daughters-in-law, stay here, go back to your families. I can't protect you. I have nothing to offer you. I have no resources. I have no husband or sons in this patriarchal society where that would be important for protection. And so she's telling them, you stay here. I am useless to you. And I think there's probably a bit of that of her saying, I am useless, I am worthless. Why would you stay with me? Go back to your families. That's where your life will be. And that's where we're going to pick up our story today. When we see what these two daughters-in-law do, and they choose different things. So I'm trying to share my screen here, which is why I'm there it is. Why I'm unable to speak. All right, here we go. So we're going to start out. So last week we went through verse 14. The daughters, Naomi and the daughters are both weeping aloud, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, presumably kissing her goodbye. But Ruth clung to her. And so we'll start with Naomi's words. Would someone read 15 through 18 for us, just to hear a little bit more of the story?
I'll read it.
Thank you.
So she said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you. When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her.
Right. Thank you, Jackie. Famous words here from Ruth. I think we've heard these many times. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. It's this beautiful expression of loyalty. I'm going to put our screen down so we can see each other's faces instead. But yeah, as we hear the story, we see Ruth's loyalty, and I think that is what we're drawn to. And it's a beautiful thing, saying, this statement of commitment. I'm going to be with you. We're in this together. But I want to think about these two daughters-in-law and their two different decisions, and wonder about what kind of motivations are at work there. This is a place where it doesn't speak at all to what was in Orpah's mind, or really what's in Ruth's mind. And so there may be several different motivations at play for each of them. And I don't know that there's necessarily just one right decision here. So what do you think drove Orpah, the one who decided to go back, the one who decided to do what Naomi had said? What do you think drove her to make that decision? Why did she listen to Naomi and go back to her people? Or why might she? There's no one right answer because we don't know.
I was struck by the fact that none of these three women has an identity because they have no man to define them. At least going back, they're the remnants of an identity if your father will receive you back. It's a very perilous situation in which they are. It could be that Orpah has more confidence in her family than Ruth does in hers, or it could really be that Ruth senses Naomi's vulnerability and wants to stay with her. But these are women without any identity at this point.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to remember how perilous their situation is, and how they're both choosing between no good options in a lot of ways. There's not should I do the right thing or be selfish? This is not really the situation where they're in. They're both unsure how and if they're going to survive, and unsure what the right thing to do might be. And so that's a great thought about, we don't know what their family situations were back home. Maybe Orpah thought she'd be received, and maybe Ruth partly didn't go back because she didn't think anyone would take her back. I mean, this can be a decision born out of desperation just as much as a decision born out of loyalty or of love for Naomi. It never tells us that Orpah did not love Naomi. They're all weeping aloud and kissing, and it's a sort of heart-wrenching scene. Anybody else want to add to that?
I was just going to say that Orpah was choosing familiarity. She was choosing to stay in Moab where, she was from, as opposed to stepping out into, the unknown. If she stayed with Naomi.
And for her, that might have been her sense of loyalty to her country and her kinfolk.
That's right. There's a loyalty in that, isn't it? There's a loyalty in going back to be with your family and your people. Yeah. Yeah, so I think I appreciate that this story doesn't need to make Orpah into a villain in order to make Ruth kind of a hero. I think that they can all be, we can sympathize with all of them and understand that where they may be coming from. And of course, Ruth is the one that gets the book named after her, and Ruth is the one that we tend to talk about as sort of the hero of the story, but they're all trying to get by. And I think that's a helpful way to remember that about them.
Yep. I also wonder, you don't get a sense of how strong a bond, has been developed. I mean, the first part of the story tends to go really quick, but they were there 10 years or more. And so it could have been that Ruth had a stronger bond with her mother-in-law than Orpah did. I mean, we don't really know that, but it's because there are times in the Bible when a piece of a story tends to kind of zoom by, but it really was a longer period of time than what the story is about. And of course, that's because they want to get to the part of the story that tells us about the people of God and what God was doing in their lives. But it helps. It hurts sometimes to not have some of the backstory.
That's right. That is helpful because we skipped over a whole lot of their lives there, and so I think it is kind of a good exercise to sort of pause sometimes and let our minds fill in some of the gaps and let our imagination do a little bit of the work there to sort of humanize these folks and see what they were like. And even though if we may not know exactly, it can help us fill out the picture a bit. Martha Ballinger on YouTube made a similar comment saying maybe she had a good family situation and Ruth had a better relationship with Naomi, I guess. Yeah, so maybe we don't know. We know that somehow the calculation was different for Orpah and Ruth. And so for whatever reason, whatever the difference may have been, they're in this situation and they choose two different paths. And so we don't know what happens to Orpah beyond this. This is where our story kind of veers to follows one of those paths and looks at Ruth and Naomi. So maybe we'll follow on with them for a little and sort of look at those words again that we just read, the famous words that are put off to the side here, where Ruth says, "Don't make me leave you. Where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge." These are words that we sometimes hear at weddings. These are a popular choice to read. And of course, that in a sense takes them out of context because these are not words of romantic love. These are not words from a wedding. They are words of these two people Ruth making this commitment to Naomi. What do you think about that? I don't think that's necessarily bad. I have read these in weddings before. These I'm not against these in a wedding, and maybe there's something interesting about having words that are not just romantic words in a wedding. So what do you think about that? The use of these words in other contexts?
It's this is actually sort of answering your first question, but also what you just mentioned, Will. It's interesting to me to actually contrast the two characters, Orpah and Ruth, because it's almost like Orpah made a safe, perhaps rational decision, and Ruth is doing something, kind of irrational. And this thing that she said here, it feels very passionate, but then you're like, well, does it make sense? Like, are you thinking through what you're about to confront, right? Because, and if I remember correctly, the historical context of this is that they're both Moabites, right? And they're looked down upon in other places. And so it's almost like, you know, like, yeah, like she is venturing into the unknown and she doesn't know what's going to happen. You know, what if like Naomi's going to die a horrible death? Does she also want to die a horrible death, you know, with Naomi? So it's like, it's very passionate, and it's, you know, a little bit irrational too. Whereas Orpah is kind of made the safe, well thought out decision, perhaps, in contrast to Ruth.
I think it's also really easy for us to forget the fact that people only really within like the last 150 years have done a lot of migrating from one part of the world to another. And we think of that as Americans pretty commonplace because most of us have ancestors who have come from other places. And it's, you know, not abnormal to talk about my ancestors who are Dutch, who moved to the US, who came as a family. And, you know, it was my great grandparents who brought 13 children over from Holland. And, you know, that's not unusual to talk about. But when we think through even that, it was still the family unit doing it together. And it's only really within the last 40 to 50 years that we've seen people make a shift toward some chosen family, and that being the family unit. You know, I think of my situation having grown up in a not so wonderful family unit and having made family for myself from very good friends over the years. And the friends who I consider my family are in the same situation, and we care for one another. And I think these verses from Ruth speak to the way that we as the people of God are called to do that for each other. We're called to care for one another in life and in death and all throughout everything in between. We walk this journey alongside of one another, and we make this commitment because the family of God is our first priority.
And if you like that person, that's a bonus. But you don't have to like the person.
Yeah.
How do you mean that? I don't
To
understand.
be loyal, you don't have to like that other person. You just have to be steadfast and think of that person's best outcome in a given situation, not to manipulate, but to be supportive and encouraging. And but when that period of contact is over, you may give a deep sigh because that was really rough, because you don't really like that person, but you're loyal to that person.
Yeah, I think I really love all the directions that we're seeing in this, because these verses kind of open that up to us. Of this is a statement of loyalty, regardless of whatever else may happen. It's not even if even death parts me from you. I mean, this is a complete commitment, regardless of how happy we are in the process of whether things turn out well or not, which is fitting for a wedding as well as for this situation with Ruth and Naomi. And Val, I appreciate how much this is a holistic choice that people are making, and this choice of commitment that that it is radical. And to look at this, I mean, even moving to another village would have been strange in that time, right? And to move away from your family. And in many parts of the world, that is still a strange thing that we have come to just take for granted, that your family might live in lots of different places, which has been sort of mind-boggling. And so here is Ruth to say, no, your people are my people now, and your God is my God. And this is a complete radical shift that she is choosing a new family. It's stepping out into the unknown, whatever that may be. So it's a bold move. Anybody else want to add to this part before we kind of go and see where this bold adventure takes them as they read a few more verses?
One of the things I was thinking is, we don't know anything about Orpah and Ruth's birth families. And, it might have been a situation where Orpah's family didn't have a support group and she felt pulled to stay and take care of her parents. Whereas maybe Ruth knew how Naomi would need somebody, and maybe her family was larger. And, so not knowing anything about the families they came from, that could have also played a part in it.
Yeah, maybe they both went where they were needed. And Orpah was needed back home, and Ruth saw that she was needed here with Naomi. That makes a lot of sense to me too. Yeah, I mean, we see that in our own lives, right? That we all end up serving in different places in different ways, and have different things that open up to us as places that we are needed. And for a season, that may be taking care of an aging parent or children or a neighbor or friend who's having a crisis. And for this season, this is where I am, and I can't do the things that I usually do. We see that in church, right? So for a season, I can be really involved in church life, and then for another season, nope, I need to be doing this for a while. This is where my focus is going to be for now, and that's where I'm needed. And I think that's a part of the seasons of life. So maybe I hadn't really thought about that for Orpah and Ruth, but yeah, maybe that is exactly what's happening. They each have a place they need to be. Barbara Moore in the YouTube comments added that she said, I like to think perhaps Ruth had been attracted to Naomi's God as well. And that's the part of the story we haven't talked about as much, and that's part in here is your God will be my God, right? The sense that perhaps Ruth is also attracted to the faith of Israel and Israel's God. And I think certainly as this story gets told from the perspective of Israel, right? This is, as we see, Ruth continues to be Ruth the Moabite. She is seen as this outsider, and yet she is drawn into the story, and she becomes part of the genealogy of David and Jesus. And she becomes central to this story in a lot of ways. So she has become part of this story of God, and so perhaps that is also what draws her in. Let's read a little bit more. I'm going to put the passage back up here and see what happens next. Let's see. So we saw verse 18. Naomi, she doesn't, fall down. She said no more. When she saw that Ruth was determined, well, I guess there's no talking her out of it, is sort of the vibe here, right? So like, okay, fine. She doesn't say, I can't believe you're doing this for me. That's so sweet. Maybe that will come later, but maybe that'll be more in retrospect. In the moment, she puts up with it and keeps going. And well, perhaps there's a lesson to be said for that too, of there's a time for looking for validation and acceptance, and sometimes there's a time to just be okay with it and get through. But let's keep reading. Would someone read for us verse 19 through 22, the end of the chapter?
I will.
See what happens as they make their way back to Bethlehem.
I will, if that's okay. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, Is this Naomi? She said to them, Call me no longer Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? So Naomi returned together with Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, who came back with her from the country of Moab. They came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest.
All right. And well, you can see the footnotes here at the bottom that help us with the word play here when she says, call me no longer Naomi, which sounds like the word for pleasant or sweet. Call me instead Mara, which is the word bitter. So it's sort of a play on words for words that sounded in Hebrew there that we lose, but we have the footnotes there to help us out with that. So let's look at this. We, in some ways, it's kind of a harsh reminder that we were just in these beautiful, lovely words of, yes, it feels like we're at a wedding, this lovely words of commitment. And then we remember, well, life is not great quite yet. So what is the reception when she gets back to Bethlehem? What do people, what's people's view of her and her situation? Says the whole.
It's almost like, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, please.
I was just gonna say, maybe the question is this Naomi is almost like, they don't even recognize her perhaps, because maybe she looks, she looks so different from when they last saw her. And then what struck me about what she said is that, she's very much stuck in her grief, right? She's kind of in the midst of it, and she perhaps can't see anything else beyond that. So that was what stood out to me, was that Naomi seemed very, obviously she's in very, very deep in her grief, but it almost seems like she's kind of stuck there.
Absolutely. This is grief is just sort of dripping from the page here, isn't it? The way she speaks, the way she says, the Lord has dealt bitterly with me. I came back empty. The word play here. What do you make of the coming back empty? Is she empty coming back, or does she have, does Ruth count for anything here?
I feel like Ruth does get the short end of the stick on this. She's like, it's almost one of those t-shirts that's like, I went all the way to Moab and all I got was this daughter-in-law. And, it's a little bit forgetful of who she is. But I think it's also significant that, in the Hebrew Bible, people's names get changed. That happens. That's not something we have never seen before. But every once in a while, a name kind of gets changed, but doesn't stick. Like God changes Jacob's name to Israel, but nobody ever actually calls him Israel. We continue to call him Jacob forever. And he never quite completely lives up to the name Israel. And here, Naomi tries to call herself Mara. She tries to call herself bitter. And the rest of the story goes on to continue calling her Naomi. And I think that signals something to us, that she imagines herself as bitter and she imagines that she is empty. And I don't deny that she absolutely must have felt that way. But I think the storyteller is signaling something to us by continuing to call her Naomi.
I read the Lord has brought me back empty, in that she has no heirs.
Yeah, I think it's certainly, she's trying to draw a contrast from leaving with her husband and her two sons and all this possibility ahead of her, right? And heirs, and coming back without her husband and sons. Yeah, and I think this, I appreciate that no one in here tries to argue with her or say, well, you got Ruth at least. There's none of that, and I think it gives voice to the way that grief is all-consuming and can, that when I went away full, you went away full, but you also were fleeing a famine where everyone was dying all around, and it was not a happy time then that she's looking back to either. And her life has been very harsh, to use that word that she finds there. And so I think she has a right to her tears and her grief and the big, broad statements. And I appreciate that Ruth doesn't say, well, what about me? I'm here. Ruth just stays with her. And I think there's something to be said for that, when being with someone in a time of grief and loss, of just being there together and not having an argument about it or trying to get into a theological discussion about it, or, well, maybe the Lord's hand is with you still, or, and anything like that. It's no, for now, we'll be there. And the whole town stirred because of them. You kind of feel how people are moved by her story and the plight that they're in.
Well, you also, go ahead.
In verse 22, we have Naomi returned together with Ruth the Moabite. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's see.
Go ahead, Larry.
Well, I was just wondering, when they're in Moab, the relationship between Ruth and Naomi and her sons and so forth was probably one kind of relationship, but now they're coming back to Naomi's land, and she may see, I mean, okay, I've got this Moabite person coming with me, and is that a good thing? Is this going to be received well? And we kind of had this relationship before, and is the relationship going to be different now? And how do I deal with that? So when the people get stirred up, or whatever the stirring means, it's like, oh golly, how's this going to work? Because before things were kind of settled, and now they're very, very unsettled.
I think that's a really good point. And the question, who am I now, I think runs throughout this. Her whole life orientation is different. When she went away, it was a difficult situation, but in terms of being a wife and a mother, she knew who she was and what was expected of her in general terms. Those things are gone, and she has some thought of the plight of a woman without a man, without any economic identity. This is a rough situation for both of them. Who am I now?
I think we don't talk about Ruth going through grief as well, because we are looking at Naomi losing a husband and 2 sons, but the wives lost their husbands also.
Yep.
And looking at YouTube, Martha Ballinger made a point, and she may have mentioned this a little while ago, about Naomi's reluctance with Ruth around, that perhaps that's because now Naomi's going to have to care for Ruth as well. I mean, she's going to have to provide for Ruth in a sense, back in her own homeland. So there's Ruth is not just a helper. She may also be a burden in a sense, or Naomi might wonder, is Ruth going to be a burden I have to care for when I'm kind of going back to my people, not sure if I can survive. It is a challenging situation of loss and peril that they're in this whole time, and so I think it's wow. There's so much here to see in the richness of this. I know that we're already over our time, and my apologies a minute ago for speaking over folks. My internet froze and there was silence, so I was filling the silence, but turns out the silence was my internet connection, not the fact that no one was talking. But I think we're back and running again. So as we keep going through the book, just kind of looking ahead a little bit, the very last line of this, let me stop sharing so we can see each other better. It ended with telling us that they're coming to Bethlehem at the end of the barley harvest. So we'll see more about the barley harvest soon, and we'll also continue to see about Ruth the Moabite. And I kind of flagged that little phrase, and we'll see that it made sense in this verse. Naomi returns with Ruth the Moabite. Sure, we got that. But as the story keeps going, she keeps getting called Ruth the Moabite, even when we're just talking about Ruth. And so we'll see that. Why does the narrator keep calling her Ruth the Moabite over and over again? Is this an epithet? Is this a little dig, a constant reminder that Ruth doesn't belong here? And so we'll see that as Naomi has returned with this woman who, I guess when you were in Moab, it made sense to marry a Moabite, but now that you're back here, why do you have a Moabite with you? So we'll see. We'll think about that as we look ahead in future weeks. But for now, any closing words before we wrap things up today? Thank you for this conversation. This has been really rich. There's so much here in the story, and I'm glad we get to stay with this for a few more weeks as we continue working our way through the story. But for now, we will end this Zoom call and shift gears and get ready to worship in just a few minutes. And so hope to, well, for those that are in the building, maybe we'll see you in person upstairs in a minute. But for everyone else, I hope to see you again next week, same time. And thank you to those on YouTube as well. So thanks for being here, and hope to see you again next week. Bye, everyone.
All right.